While they pitied poor Mom living in their musty basement, they had no idea I was worth over $11 million, a secret my son and daughter-in-law would only discover after they had already begun making plans to move me to Golden Sunset. Assisted living when they found my basement too much of a burden to maintain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've saved something truly special for you. Mom, we need to talk about something important, my son, Michael said, settling into the worn armchair I'd kept from my old house. His voice had that careful gentleness people adopt when delivering news they expect will be upsetting. At 73, I recognized the tone immediately. I'd heard it increasingly often since moving into his basement 5 years ago after my husband William's death. My daughter-in-law Cynthia perched on the arm of his chair, her manicured fingers resting supportively on his shoulder. "We've been thinking about your living situation, Eleanor," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "and we believe we've found the perfect solution." I set down my crossword puzzle and removed my reading glasses, taking a moment to study them both. Michael, at 48, had his father's strong jawline, but my cautious nature. Cynthia, 5 years younger, was immaculately put together as always, her blonde hair freshly highlighted, her casual outfit likely costing more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. The diamond tennis bracelet glinting on her wrist was probably worth more than everything I visibly owned, or so they thought. What solution would that be? I asked mildly, though I suspected where this conversation was heading. There had been hints for months, comments about the basement stairs being too steep for someone my age, observations about how I might benefit from more social interaction with peers, casual mentions of friends whose parents had just blossomed in retirement communities. "We've been looking into Golden Sunset Assisted Living," Michael explained, leaning forward earnestly. "It's that beautiful new facility near the lake. They have apartments with emergency call buttons, daily activities, transportation to medical appointments, everything you could need, and a beauty salon right on the premises," Cynthia added brightly, as if that might be the selling point that would convince me. "They even have a spa day every Thursday. Wouldn't that be lovely, Eleanor?" I glanced around my basement apartment, the space I'd carefully arranged to suit my needs after selling my home in Maryland. It wasn't luxurious by any standard, but it was comfortable and private. A bedroom, small sitting area, compact kitchenette, and a bathroom Michael had renovated to include grab bars and a walk-in shower. The ceiling was low and the windows were small, but it had been a practical solution during a difficult transition after William's sudden heart attack. What they didn't know was that I had maintained the modest beachfront cottage William and I owned in the Outer Banks, a property now worth nearly $1.2 million that I visited on bus trips with my seniors group twice a year. Those group trips were actually peaceful solo retreats where I could enjoy ocean views from the wraparound deck and make private calls to my international investment managers without fear of being overheard. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I'm quite content here. The arrangement has worked well, hasn't it?" Michael and Cynthia exchanged that look, the silent communication between spouses that excludes everyone else. I'd shared such looks with William during our 42 years of marriage. "Mom, we've been happy to have you here," Michael began. "But we need to think about the future. What if you fell on those stairs? What if there was an emergency and we weren't home?" "I haven't fallen once in 5 years," I pointed out reasonably. "And I have the emergency button pendant you insisted I wear." I tapped the device hanging around my neck, though I kept silent about how often I forgot to put it on. I also didn't mention that I regularly did Tai Chi and strength training when they weren't home, exercises that kept me far more physically capable than they assumed. Cynthia leaned forward, her expression professionally sympathetic. As a pharmaceutical sales representative, she had perfected the art of appearing deeply concerned while steering conversations toward predetermined outcomes. Eleanor, the basement is becoming difficult to maintain properly. There are issues with humidity control, and the dehumidifier needs constant emptying. The space was never really designed for long-term living. This was a new angle, suggesting the problem was the space rather than my ability to live independently. Clever, but transparent. I empty the dehumidifier myself every day, I countered. It's hardly a burden. But it shouldn't be your responsibility at your age, Cynthia insisted with that same practiced smile. And frankly, Michael and I are thinking about our future too. Emily will be heading to college in 2 years, and we've been considering downsizing ourselves. Ah, there it was, the real motivation emerging. My granddaughter Emily's education would be expensive, especially with her heart set on East Coast universities. Michael and Cynthia lived well but not extravagantly on their combined incomes. The substantial equity in their suburban Chicago home could certainly ease anticipated financial pressures if they downsized. What they didn't know was that I had already established a $750,000 educational trust for Emily that would cover not just her undergraduate education but graduate school as well, should she choose that path. The paperwork was filed with my attorney, scheduled to be revealed on her 18th birthday, still nearly 2 years away. I see, I said simply, not revealing my thoughts. And this Golden Sunset place, what are the costs involved? Michael pulled a glossy brochure from his pocket, unfolding it on the coffee table between us. They have several options depending on the level of care needed. The basic independent living apartment starts at $4,200 monthly, which includes meals, housekeeping, and activities. I maintained my neutral expression, though the figure was precisely what I had expected, substantial enough to strain my apparent resources, but not so exorbitant as to seem immediately impossible. Based on what Michael and Cynthia believed they knew about my finances, this would consume nearly all of my visible monthly income. That's quite an expense, I observed mildly. My Social Security and William's pension don't amount to that much. We know, Michael acknowledged, seeming relieved I'd raised the financial aspect myself. We've been looking into options. There's long-term care insurance, and some of your investments could be restructured for better income generation. My investments, as far as Michael knew, consisted of a modest IRA worth perhaps $180,000 and a few certificates of deposit I'd mentioned over the years. These were real accounts, but they represented less than 2% of my actual net worth. The majority of my assets were held in a complex network of trusts, offshore accounts, and investment vehicles that I had carefully structured with top financial advisors over decades. I'd need to think carefully about disrupting my investment strategy at this stage of life, I said, deliberately vague. Stability has always been my priority. Cynthia nodded with the exaggerated understanding one might show a child. Of course, Eleanor. That's why we've already spoken with our financial advisor about your situation. Bradley thinks he could help restructure things to generate the necessary income without touching your principal. The presumption was breathtaking. Consulting their advisor about my finances without my knowledge or consent. Yet it wasn't surprising. Since moving into their home, I'd noticed a gradual shift in how they perceived me. From independent adult to dependent elder, someone whose decisions required oversight and correction. What would they think if they knew I had consulted last month with the former Secretary of the Treasury about tax optimization strategies for my international holdings? Or that 3 major energy companies still paid me 6-figure consulting fees annually for my expertise in geological assessment of potential drilling sites? That's thoughtful, I replied neutrally. But I prefer to work with my own advisors. On financial matters? You have financial advisors? Cynthia asked with poorly concealed surprise. I thought William handled all that before he passed. The assumption was telling, and unfortunately common for women of my generation. Despite my advanced degrees and professional accomplishments, Many people presumed my husband had managed our finances simply because that was the norm for our age group. William and I made decisions together, I corrected gently. But yes, I've maintained relationships with our advisors. This was true, though Edward Sullivan at Goldman Sachs managed only my visible domestic accounts, not the more substantial holdings elsewhere. My primary wealth manager, Sanjay Patel at Blackstone, handled the portfolio that neither Michael nor Cynthia knew existed. It wasn't entirely their fault that they underestimated me. I had perhaps encouraged this perception by settling into the role of the grateful, undemanding mother-in-law. I cooked occasional meals, helped with housework, babysit Emily when needed, and never imposed my opinions on household matters. This deference had seemed the price of harmonious cohabitation in a home that wasn't mine. More significantly, I had never corrected their assumptions about my financial situation. When William died, I told them only that he had left me comfortable with his pension, insurance, and our savings. This was true, but dramatically incomplete. What I never mentioned was my own highly successful career as a petroleum geologist, one of the few women in the field when I started in the late 1970s. I didn't speak of the patents I held on several extraction methodologies, the consulting firm I established after leaving ExxonMobil, or the strategic investments I'd made in emerging energy technologies. Most importantly, I never disclosed the offshore accounts and diversified portfolio that had grown steadily over decades of disciplined saving and informed investing. This privacy wasn't deception for its own sake. It stemmed from values formed during my early professional years, when being a woman in a male-dominated industry taught me that financial details were best kept private. William had understood and shared this philosophy. We lived modestly while building substantial wealth, finding satisfaction in security rather than display. "Mom, we're just trying to help," Michael said, bringing me back to the present conversation. "We worry about you down here all alone. At Golden Sunset, you'd have companions your own age, activities, and medical staff if anything happened." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the genuine concern beneath his presumption. He wasn't being malicious. He truly believed he was looking out for my best interests. The problem wasn't his intentions, but his assumptions about my capabilities, needs, and resources. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, folding the brochure and setting it aside. "But any changes to my investments would require careful consideration. I'd need to speak with my advisors first." Michael looked simultaneously relieved and concerned. Relieved that professional financial guidance was already in place, concerned that it might complicate the plan he and Cynthia had evidently spent considerable time developing. "That's good. Mom, maybe we could all meet with your advisor together? Bradley could coordinate with them to ensure we're considering all options." The thought of Bradley, their 30-something financial planner who specialized in suburban family portfolios, coordinating with Sanjay Patel, who managed billions in assets for ultra-high net worth clients internationally, almost made me smile. They existed in entirely different financial universes. "Perhaps," I said noncommittally. "I'll need time to think about this Golden Sunset possibility. It's quite a significant change to consider." They exchanged another of those looks. This one communicating mild frustration at my lack of immediate enthusiasm, but also confidence that I would eventually be brought around to their viewpoint. "Of course. Take some time," Cynthia said, standing to signal the conversation's end. "But don't wait too long. Golden Sunset has a waiting list, and we were only able to get you on it because my client Sandra works in their administrative office." As they headed upstairs, leaving the brochure purposefully on my coffee table, I remained seated, contemplating the conversation and its implications. Their concern wasn't entirely self-serving. There were legitimate reasons to consider whether a basement apartment remained appropriate housing for a woman in her 70s. Yet their approach, making plans without consulting me, presuming financial decision-making authority, treating my independence as negotiable, revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood both my capabilities and my circumstances. I picked up the glossy brochure and examined the photos of Golden Sunset's amenities. The facility looked pleasant enough: landscaped grounds, comfortable common areas, smiling seniors engaged in various activities. But what struck me most was how institutional it felt despite the upscale marketing. The independence it offered was carefully managed and substantially limited. Residents lived within parameters set by others, their choices narrowed to menu options and activity schedules. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent decades making high-stakes decisions that influenced global energy markets. I had testified before congressional committees, negotiated with foreign governments, and managed teams of brilliant but often difficult engineers and scientists. Yet here I was, being guided toward a future where choosing between bingo and watercolor painting would constitute a significant decision. Later that evening, after the house had quieted, I sat at my small desk and opened my laptop, a modest Dell that gave no hint of its specialized security features. Using a complex authentication process involving multiple security keys and biometric verification, I logged into my primary investment management portal. The screen displayed a consolidated overview of assets that would have astonished Michael and Cynthia. Investment accounts totaling just over $8.2 million. Real estate holdings worth approximately $3.4 million, and intellectual property royalties that generated roughly $340,000 annually. A notification indicated that my quarterly dividend payment from my early investment in a renewable energy startup had been deposited, another $86,000 added to accounts that already held more wealth than Michael and Cynthia would likely accumulate in their lifetimes. I had invested in solar technology long before it became mainstream, recognizing its potential while still working in the fossil fuel industry. William and I had built this wealth methodically over decades, living below our means while holding executive positions at major energy companies. We purchased investment properties in emerging markets, diversified into technology and healthcare stocks before they became obvious choices, and maintained the discipline to reinvest rather than spend during market upswings. The basement apartment, where I now sat with its aging furniture and limited natural light, was entirely incongruous with my financial reality. I could purchase a luxury condominium outright, maintain homes in multiple countries, or live in high-end retirement communities that would make Golden Sunset look austere by comparison. Yet I had chosen this modest existence, initially from practical necessity during grief, then from a desire for family connection, and finally from simple habit. The arrangement had served its purpose, providing proximity to my granddaughter during her formative teenage years and giving me time to adjust to widowhood without the burden of maintaining a house alone. But Michael and Cynthia's well-intentioned intervention had clarified something important. The current situation had created a damaging imbalance in our relationship. Their perception of me as financially vulnerable and increasingly dependent had undermined the mutual respect essential to healthy family dynamics. I opened an encrypted folder containing photos from my last senior's bus trip to the Outer Banks. Actually, a meeting with my international investment team at my beachfront property. There I was, dressed not in the simple slacks and cardigans I wore in Michael's home, but in tailored business attire, reviewing portfolio projections with advisors who treated me with the deference my expertise warranted. The disparity between these two versions of my life had once seemed necessary and even amusing. Now it felt increasingly like a charade that served no one well, least of all me. The question wasn't whether I could afford Golden Sunset. I could purchase the entire facility if I desired, but whether continuing to conceal my financial reality served any positive purpose. The privacy that had once felt prudent now seemed to be enabling precisely the kind of protective overreach I had always abhorred in others' treatment of elderly family members. As I closed the laptop, I realized I had reached a decision point. Maintaining the status quo was no longer viable, but neither was simply acquiescing to their plans for my future. What I needed was a strategy, one that would re-establish appropriate boundaries while preserving family relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. Throughout my professional career, I had navigated complex situations involving powerful personalities and competing interests. I had managed multi-million-dollar projects and negotiated with government officials across 3 continents. Yet somehow, addressing this family dynamic felt more challenging than any corporate boardroom I'd ever entered. I glanced at the small collection of photos displayed on my desk, mostly family images that reinforced the grandmother identity I presented in this house. Hidden among them, however, was a picture of William and me at the White House Energy Innovation Award ceremony, where my work on extraction efficiency had been recognized by the president. Michael had never asked about it, assuming perhaps that we had attended as guests rather than honorees. Tomorrow, I would begin developing my approach, methodical and measured, as I'd been taught in engineering school and had practiced throughout my career. The outcome couldn't be predicted with certainty, but one thing was clear. The assumption that I needed rescuing from financial limitations was about to be definitively corrected. What I couldn't have anticipated was how quickly circumstances would force my hand, or that the catalyst would come not from Michael and Cynthia's continuing pressure, but from the innocent curiosity of my 16-year-old granddaughter Emily, the one person in the household who still treated me as a fully capable individual with a life and identity beyond grandma in the basement. The morning after Michael and Cynthia's golden sunset proposal, I awoke to the familiar sounds of the household above me stirring to life. Michael's shower running, Cynthia's hairdryer humming, Emily's music playing just loudly enough to assert teenage independence without triggering parental intervention. The rhythm of their morning routines had become as familiar to me as the subtle seasonal changes in light that filtered through my small basement windows. I followed my own morning ritual, gentle stretching exercises learned from the physical therapist I privately consulted. Another detail I hadn't shared with Michael: a cup of strong black tea and a review of financial news on my tablet. Global markets had reacted overnight to a policy announcement from the European Central Bank, a development that would require adjustments to my European holdings, something I would address during my secure call with Sanjay later this morning. Before that call, however, I needed to follow through on my decision to begin reasserting boundaries with Michael and Cynthia. The Golden Sunset brochure still lay on my coffee table where they had strategically left it, a silent reminder of their expectations. I picked it up and tucked it into my desk drawer. I wouldn't be needing it. Upstairs, the front door opened and closed twice in quick succession, Michael leaving for his software company, Cynthia heading to her pharmaceutical sales meetings. The house fell momentarily quiet before Emily's footsteps descended the stairs. Unlike her parents' carefully measured interactions with me, Emily's approach to our relationship had always been refreshingly direct. "Grandma," she called from the top of the basement stairs, "are you decent? Can I come down?" "Of course, dear," I replied, quickly closing the financial news app and opening a more innocuous word puzzle game. "I'm just having my morning tea." Emily bounded down the stairs with the physical confidence of youth, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her school uniform somehow managing to look both rumpled and deliberately styled. At 16, she balanced on the edge between childhood and adulthood, still collecting plush animals but also deeply engaged with climate activism and international affairs. "Mom says you're moving to Golden Sunset," she announced without preamble, dropping onto my sofa and helping herself to one of the butter cookies I kept in a tin on the coffee table. "She was telling Dad last night that it's basically a done deal, just a matter of helping you accept the inevitable." I suppressed a smile at her perfect imitation of Cynthia's professionally empathetic tone. "Is that what she said?" "Pretty much verbatim." Emily studied me with surprising perception. "But you're not going, are you? What makes you think that?" She shrugged, reaching for another cookie. "Because you don't need their help the way they think you do. I've seen you reading those financial reports when you think no one's watching." And you speak French on the phone sometimes when Mom and Dad aren't home. Her observation caught me off guard. I had always been careful about maintaining my grandmotherly persona in this house, saving my business calls for times when I believed everyone was out. Clearly, I had underestimated Emily's awareness and observational skills. "You're quite perceptive," I acknowledged, deciding honesty was the best approach with her. "I do have some international investments that occasionally require attention." "And you speak to people in French about them?" she pressed, clearly intrigued by this glimpse of a grandmother different from the one she thought she knew. "Some of my business associates are based in Paris," I explained, seeing no reason to obfuscate. "It's more precise to communicate with them in their native language." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "Business associates? Grandma? What exactly did you do before you retired? Mom always just says you were in the energy industry like it was some boring office job." The question presented an unexpected opportunity, a chance to begin re-establishing my actual identity within the family, starting with the member most likely to accept it without judgment. "I was a petroleum geologist," I said, watching her expression. "I specialized in identifying viable drilling locations based on geological formations. Later in my career, I ran my own consulting firm advising energy companies on exploration strategies." "Wait, seriously?" Emily sat up straighter, cookie forgotten. "That's actually really cool, but also kind of controversial now with climate change and everything." "The science itself isn't controversial," I clarified. "Understanding Earth's geological formations is neutral knowledge. How that knowledge is applied, however, raises important ethical questions. Questions I've become increasingly engaged with in recent years." I didn't mention that my engagement included substantial investments in renewable energy companies and funding university research on carbon capture technologies. Those details could wait for another conversation. Emily seemed to be processing this new information about her grandmother, reconciling it with the image she had previously held. "So you weren't just Dad's mom or Grandpa William's wife. You had this whole career I never knew about." "Many women of my generation balanced family responsibilities with professional ambitions," I said gently. "We simply didn't always foreground our accomplishments the way younger generations rightfully do now." She nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at her phone and jumped up. "I'm going to be late for school. Can we talk more about this later? I have so many questions." "Of course," I agreed, touched by her genuine interest. "I'd like that very much." After she hurried upstairs, I sat considering this unexpected development. Emily had inadvertently provided me with an opening to begin revealing aspects of my identity that had remained concealed in this household. Her natural curiosity might serve as a bridge toward broader family understanding of who I actually was, professionally, personally, and financially. The house now empty, I returned to my desk and initiated the secure call with Sanjay, discussing adjustments to my European portfolio in response to the ECB announcement. We also reviewed progress on establishing the research foundation I had been planning, a significant philanthropic initiative focused on developing affordable clean energy, technologies for emerging economies. "The legal framework is nearly complete," Sanjay informed me. "We just need your decision on the initial funding level and board composition." "I'll provide those details next week," I assured him. "There are some family matters I need to address. First, that may influence the timing of the public announcement." After concluding the call, I opened my personal email to find a message from Barbara Chen, the current CEO of Chen Geological Consulting, the firm I had founded and later sold to my top executives when William and I semi-retired. Barbara was letting me know that the company had been approached about a major assessment project in Norway, and the client had specifically requested my involvement as a senior advisor. The timing was either fortuitous or problematic, depending on perspective. Taking on the Norway project would require travel and a level of professional engagement that would be impossible to conceal from Michael and Cynthia. it would effectively force the conversation about my actual professional status and financial situation that I had been contemplating initiating more gradually. I had just begun composing a response to Barbara when I heard the front door open and close upstairs, followed by Cynthia's voice calling out, "Eleanor, are you home?" Her return was unexpected. Her sales route typically kept her out until late afternoon. I quickly closed my email and secured my computer before responding. "Yes, I'm down here." Cynthia's footsteps descended the stairs, her high heels tapping, precisely on each tread. She appeared in my doorway holding a stack of papers and wearing the determined expression I recognized from previous helpful interventions. "I had a cancellation with Dr. Rosen's office, so I thought I'd use the time to get started on some of the Golden Sunset paperwork," she announced, settling uninvited at my small dining table and arranging the forms in neat piles. "They need quite a bit of financial information to process your application and determine what additional assistance programs you might qualify for." The presumption was breathtaking, proceeding with applications without my agreement, assuming I would need financial assistance, preparing to disclose my private information to third parties without my consent. Yet her expression held no awareness of crossing boundaries. She genuinely believed she was being helpful. "Cynthia," I said carefully, "I haven't made any decision about Golden Sunset. I appreciate your research, but completing applications seems premature." She waved off my objection with the practiced air of someone accustomed to overcoming client resistance. "It's just preliminary paperwork, Eleanor. Getting everything started now means you'll have priority when you're ready to make the move. Besides, Sandra can't hold your spot indefinitely." I observed her for a moment, noting how her entire approach positioned me as a problem requiring management, rather than a person with agency and preference. This interaction crystallized my growing certainty that half measures would be insufficient. The misperceptions underlying our family dynamic required direct correction. "I won't be moving to Golden Sunset," I stated firmly, meeting her gaze directly. "While I appreciate the concern behind your suggestion, that living arrangement doesn't align with my preferences or needs." Her expression shifted from confident efficiency to the patient tolerance one might show a child refusing medicine. "Eleanor, I understand change is frightening at your age. Everyone feels that way initially. But Michael and I have researched this thoroughly, and Golden Sunset truly is the best option for your situation." "My situation?" I repeated evenly. "And what exactly do you understand about my situation, Cynthia?" Something in my tone finally registered, causing her to look up from the forms with slight confusion. "Well, we know that maintaining independent living will become increasingly challenging. The basement stairs are already difficult for you, and your fixed income simply won't cover the kind of in-home assistance you'll eventually need." "Both of those assumptions are incorrect," I replied, maintaining my composure. "The stairs present. No difficulty whatsoever. I actually use them for exercise when the house is empty. And my financial resources are considerably more extensive than you appear to believe." Cynthia's expression shifted between confusion and the kind of sympathetic concern that actually masked dismissal. "Eleanor, there's no need to be embarrassed about financial limitations. Many people in your generation didn't have the benefit of financial planning resources that are available today. That's why Michael and I want to help." Her condescension, however well-intentioned, strengthened my resolve. "I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my circumstances," I said, rising from my chair. "Perhaps it would be best if we discussed this when Michael is home as well. Could we plan for a conversation this evening?" She hesitated, clearly trying to interpret my unexpected resistance. "Of course, if that would make you more comfortable. But these forms really are time-sensitive." "The forms won't be necessary," I interrupted with gentle firmness. "This evening, I'd like to clarify some aspects of my situation that may not have been apparent to you and Michael." After Cynthia departed, visibly puzzled by the interaction but taking the forms with her, I sat considering how best to approach the evening's conversation. The gradual revelation I had been contemplating would need to be accelerated. Emily's discovery and Cynthia's presumptuous paperwork had effectively forced my timeline. I spent the afternoon preparing, gathering key documents that would provide irrefutable evidence of my actual financial and professional status. The challenge wasn't assembling proof, I had abundant documentation, but rather determining how to present information that would fundamentally alter family perceptions without unnecessarily damaging relationships or creating resentment. By 5 o'clock, I had created a concise overview of my financial holdings, professional accomplishments, and current business engagements. I had also prepared responses to the questions and objections I anticipated from Michael and Cynthia. Why hadn't I shared this information earlier? Why had I chosen to live in their basement if I had such substantial resources? What did this revelation mean for our current living arrangement? As I reviewed these materials, my phone chimed with a text message from Emily. Dad just got home and Mom is talking his ear off about you being difficult about Golden Sunset. Whatever you're planning, I'm on your side. Her message brought an unexpected smile. Despite being the youngest family member, Emily had demonstrated the greatest ability to see me as a complete person rather than a role or responsibility. Her support, while unanticipated, was welcome. Shortly after 6, Michael's familiar knock sounded on my door. Mom, can we talk for a minute? I opened the door to find him standing there alone, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. Cynthia mentioned you had some reservations about the Golden Sunset paperwork. I thought we might discuss it before dinner. Actually, I replied, I'd prefer to have one conversation with both of you. Is Cynthia upstairs? She's finishing dinner preparations, he confirmed. We could talk afterward if that works better for you. That would be fine, I agreed. And is Emily home as well? She's at soccer practice until 8, he said, seeming slightly puzzled by the question. Did you need her for something? Not specifically, I answered honestly. But what I have to discuss affects the entire family, so her presence might be appropriate. Michael's brow furrowed slightly. Mom, you're being rather cryptic. Is everything okay? Are there health concerns you haven't shared with us? The immediate leap to health worries was telling. Another manifestation of how they had categorized me primarily as an aging parent, rather than a multidimensional person with agency and capability. My health is excellent, I assured him. This is about clarifying some misconceptions about my financial and professional situation, but it's best discussed comprehensively rather than piecemeal. His expression registered surprise, followed by a flicker of what might have been embarrassment. I see. Well, we'll talk after dinner then. He hesitated, then added awkwardly, I'll call you when it's ready. As he headed back upstairs, I returned to my desk and opened the carved wooden box where I kept my most significant professional mementos, awards, patents, news clippings, and photographs documenting aspects of my career that had remained invisible to my son's family. These tangible proofs of my professional life would supplement the financial documentation in providing a complete picture of who I actually was beyond Michael's mother, or Emily's grandmother. When Michael called me up for dinner 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in the dining room was noticeably strained. Cynthia greeted me with exaggerated cheer that barely masked her confusion and concern. The table was set with the good china, a clear indication that she viewed this as an important occasion requiring special handling. Throughout dinner, conversation remained superficial, Cynthia describing challenges with a difficult client, Michael mentioning a delayed project timeline, both of them carefully avoiding any reference to Golden Sunset or the conversation to come. I participated politely but minimally, conserving energy for the more significant discussion ahead. As Cynthia cleared the dinner plates, the front door opened, announcing Emily's return from soccer practice. She entered the dining room still, in her uniform, cheeks flushed from exertion, her perceptive gaze quickly assessing the unusual tension around the table. "Perfect timing," I observed mildly. "Would you mind joining us for a conversation, Emily? There are some family matters I'd like to discuss with everyone present." Michael and Cynthia exchanged confused glances at my inclusion of Emily in what they clearly expected to be an adults-only conversation about my care needs. Emily, however, immediately pulled out a chair and sat down, her expression openly curious. "Now that we're all together," I began once Cynthia had reluctantly resumed her seat, "I need to address some misconceptions about my circumstances that have been influencing family decisions and dynamics." I removed a folder from beside my chair and placed it on the table. For the past 5 years, I've allowed an incomplete understanding of my financial situation to persist. This wasn't intended to deceive, but rather reflected privacy habits developed throughout my professional life. However, recent events, particularly the Golden Sunset proposal, have made it clear that this partial understanding is creating problems. Michael leaned forward slightly. "Mom, if there are financial concerns about assisted living costs, we can—" "There are no financial concerns," I interrupted gently but firmly. "That's precisely what I need to clarify." I opened the folder and removed the first document, a comprehensive financial statement from my primary investment management firm. My current net worth is approximately $11 million. My investment accounts generate annual income exceeding $450,000, completely separate from William's pension or my Social Security benefits. The statement landed in the center of the dining table like a stone disturbing still water. Michael stared at it uncomprehendingly, while Cynthia's eyes widened as she processed the figure at the bottom of the page. Emily, interestingly, appeared, less surprised than her parents, perhaps because our morning conversation had already begun reshaping her perception of her grandmother. This can't be right," Michael finally managed, picking up the statement with visibly unsteady hands. "Mom, where would you possibly get this kind of money?" "From my career," I replied simply, removing more documents from the folder. I wasn't merely in the energy industry, as has been the family shorthand. I was a senior petroleum geologist at ExxonMobil, then founded my own consulting firm that became an industry leader in exploration analysis. I laid out my professional credentials one by one, the patents that still generated substantial royalties, news coverage of major projects I had led, photographs of me with industry leaders and government officials, awards recognizing my contributions to the field. I never retired completely, I continued, presenting the email I had received that morning from Barbara. I still consult on significant projects, most recently this Norwegian assessment that will require international travel next month. The silence that followed was profound. Michael continued examining the documents, moving from disbelief to gradually dawning comprehension. Cynthia remained frozen, the implications for her carefully constructed plans visibly overwhelming her capacity to respond. Emily, by contrast, was leaning forward with undisguised fascination, clearly connecting the woman revealed in these documents with glimpses she had already observed. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Michael finally asked, his voice a complex mixture of confusion, hurt, and something approaching awe as he studied a photograph of me receiving an Industry Lifetime Achievement Award just 3 years earlier. "All this time, living in our basement when I could have purchased any home I wanted." I completed his thought gently. "Yes, financially that's true. But after William died, what I needed wasn't a larger house but family. Connection. The basement apartment provided that while giving me privacy and independence." "But you never mentioned any of this," he persisted, gesturing to the professional accomplishments displayed before him. "Growing up, I knew you worked, but you always emphasized being home for dinner, attending my school events. You never talked about any of this." The pain in his voice suggested something beyond surprise at my financial status, perhaps a more fundamental realization that he had never fully known his own mother. This was the delicate aspect of the revelation I had anticipated and prepared for. Many women of my generation compartmentalized our lives, I explained. At home, I was primarily your mother and William's wife, because that's what the social conventions of the time expected. But that doesn't mean my professional identity wasn't equally significant to me. So all these years in the basement, Cynthia finally spoke, her voice tight with what might have been embarrassment or indignation. You've been what? Pitying us for thinking you needed our help? Laughing at our concerns about your welfare? Not at all, I countered calmly. I've been grateful for the connection to family during a difficult transition, but recently, that arrangement has evolved in ways that aren't healthy for any of us, with assumptions about my capabilities and needs that don't reflect reality. Like Golden Sunset, Emily interjected, earning a sharp look from her mother. Yes, I acknowledged. The Golden Sunset proposal made it clear that continuing to allow misperceptions about my financial situation was creating a dynamic where decisions were being made for me rather than with me, decisions based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions. Michael set down the documents, his expression troubled. Mom, we were just trying to help. If we had known, I understand that, I assured him. Your intentions were entirely loving. But the outcome was a relationship increasingly defined by perceived dependency rather than mutual respect between adults. Cynthia's posture had grown increasingly rigid throughout the conversation. So, what exactly are you saying, Eleanor? That you're moving out? Buying some luxury condo now that we know you can afford it? The defensive edge in her tone suggested she was interpreting my revelation primarily as rejection, perhaps even seeing it as an indictment of the basement accommodations they had provided. This reaction, while not unexpected, required careful navigation. I'm saying that we need to recalibrate our family relationships based on who I actually am, not who you've assumed me to be, I replied evenly. As for living arrangements, I haven't made any immediate decisions. That's something we should discuss together, now that all the relevant information is available. This is so cool, Emily declared, picking up one of the industry magazine covers featuring an article about my work. My grandmother is basically a secret boss lady who's been hiding in our basement. It's like a movie plot. Her characterization, while simplistic, diffused some of the tension around the table. Michael's expression softened slightly, while even Cynthia's rigid posture relaxed marginally. There's one more thing you should know, I continued, withdrawing a final document from the folder. 5 years ago, shortly after moving in here, I established an educational trust for Emily. It currently holds $750,000 designated specifically for her college and graduate education, if she chooses to pursue it. Emily's eyes widened dramatically. Are you serious? So I can go to any college? Even the really expensive ones without worrying about student loans? That was the intention, I confirmed, smiling at her unfiltered response. Though I hope you'll still choose schools based on their academic programs rather than just their price tags. Michael stared at the trust documentation, visibly struggling to process this additional revelation. Mom, I don't know what to say. We've been so worried about paying for Emily's education, setting aside what we could, knowing it wouldn't be enough for the schools she's interested in. I know, I said gently. That concern was part of the motivation behind the Golden Sunset proposal, the potential equity from selling this house if you downsized. I understood the financial pressures you were facing, which made your concern for my welfare all the more meaningful. You were willing to adjust your own lives to ensure mine was secure. This acknowledgement of their genuine care seemed to ease something in Michael's expression. We really were just trying to help, he said quietly. But it seems we didn't understand what kind of help you actually needed, or if you needed any at all. What I need, I replied thoughtfully, is to be seen accurately by my family, not just as Michael's mother or Emily's grandmother, but as Eleanor Chen, with all the complexity, capability, and history that entails. Emily nodded vigorously. I want to hear everything about your career. Did you travel to oil rigs? Did you discover any major oil fields? Do you have, enemies in the industry? Her enthusiastic questions brought a welcome moment of levity to the conversation. Perhaps not enemies, I smiled, but certainly some spirited professional rivalries. And yes, I've visited drilling platforms worldwide, though that was never my favorite part of the job. Cynthia, who had remained largely silent during these exchanges, finally spoke again. I still don't understand why you would choose to live in our basement when you could afford. She gestured vaguely. Anything. Literally anything else. Her question was valid, if bluntly expressed. After William died, the house in Maryland felt unbearably empty, I explained. Living alone with grief can be isolating in ways money can't solve. Being near family provided connection and purpose during that difficult transition. I glanced around the dining room, taking in the familiar space where we had shared countless meals. Additionally, these 5 years gave me the privilege of being present for Emily's formative teenage years in a way geographical distance wouldn't have allowed. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand, a simple gesture that communicated more than words could have. And now? Michael asked tentatively. What happens now? It was the essential question, one I had been considering since recognizing the need for change. Now we adjust our family dynamics to reflect reality rather than misconception. I'm not an elderly mother requiring rescue or management. I'm a financially independent professional with continuing career engagements. Does that mean you're moving out? The vulnerability in his question revealed that beneath the confusion and surprise, there was genuine attachment to having me present in their daily lives. Not immediately, I assured him. Any transitions should be thoughtful rather than reactive. But yes, establishing my own residence again would likely be healthier for all of us in the long term. The conversation continued late into the evening, flowing through cycles of questions, explanations, and gradually adjusting perspectives. Michael's initial shock evolved into something approaching pride as he absorbed the full scope of my professional accomplishments. Cynthia remained more reserved, clearly struggling to reconcile the capable, wealthy woman revealed in my documentation with the elderly mother-in-law she had been planning to relocate to assisted living. Emily, meanwhile, appointed herself unofficial facilitator, asking insightful questions that helped bridge understanding between generations. Her perspective, unburdened by the preconceptions that had shaped her parents' view of me, proved invaluable in navigating the complex emotional territory we were traversing. By the time we finally concluded, the dining room table was covered with documents, photographs, and empty coffee cups. The family with whom I had shared a home for 5 years was seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time, a revelation that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of our relationship in ways that would continue to unfold in the days ahead. What I couldn't have anticipated, however, was how quickly these revelations would be tested, or that Cynthia's resistance to this new reality would manifest in ways that would threaten not just our family harmony, but potentially my autonomy and professional standing. The morning after my revelation to the family, I awoke before dawn, my mind already cycling through potential next steps. The basement apartment that had been my home for 5 years suddenly felt different. Not physically changed, but contextually transformed. Now that my family knew the truth about my financial status and professional identity, continuing to live in this space seemed increasingly incongruous. I made tea and opened my laptop, reviewing emails from Barbara Chen about the Norwegian project. The assessment would require 3 weeks on site in Bergen, followed by analysis work that could be conducted remotely. It was exactly the kind of intellectually engaging project I had always found fulfilling. Complex geological analysis with significant environmental implications for sustainable drilling practices. After confirming my participation, I began researching housing options that would better align with my actual lifestyle while maintaining reasonable proximity to Michael's family. A luxury condominium development near Lake Michigan caught my attention, offering security, privacy, and sufficient space for a proper home office. I bookmarked several listings for further consideration. Around 7, I heard movement upstairs as the household began stirring. Unlike most mornings, however, an unusual tension seemed to permeate the sounds. Cabinet doors closing with slightly more force than necessary, hushed but intense conversation between Michael and Cynthia. Even Emily's music noticeably absent. My revelations had clearly disrupted the family's established patterns and assumptions. This disruption was necessary, but undeniably uncomfortable for everyone involved. How we navigated this transitional period would determine whether our relationships emerged strengthened by greater authenticity or damaged by resentment and misunderstanding. Just after 8, footsteps descended the basement stairs, Michael's, judging by the cadence. His tentative knock was followed by, "Mom, do you have a minute?" When I opened the door, he stood there holding 2 coffee mugs, his expression a mixture of lingering disbelief and something approaching reverence. "I thought you might want coffee instead of tea this morning," he offered, extending one of the mugs. "It's a lot to process, isn't it? For all of us." I accepted the coffee with a smile, recognizing the gesture as the peace offering it was intended to be. "Yes, it is. Come in, Michael." He settled into the armchair, the same one from which he and Cynthia had presented their golden sunset proposal just days earlier. Now he looked at me differently, his gaze taking in details he had previously overlooked or misinterpreted. The reading glasses hanging from a chain I used when reviewing technical documents, the subtle but high-quality watch on my wrist. Even my posture, more commanding and less deliberately diminished than the elderly mother role I had unconsciously adopted in this house. "I spent half the night looking you up online," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Articles about your work, interviews you've given to industry publications, your patents. It's extraordinary, Mom. Why didn't I know any of this?" The question contained genuine bewilderment, but no accusation. Michael wasn't angry about my privacy. He was struggling to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the accomplished professional revealed in my documentation. "We never really discussed my work in detail when you were growing up," I explained gently. "It was the era of compartmentalized lives for women, professional identity kept separate from family identity. By the time societal expectations shifted, those communication patterns were already established between us." He nodded slowly, processing this explanation. "I remember you traveling sometimes, being on calls that Dad said we shouldn't interrupt. But somehow I never connected that to this level of achievement." He hesitated, then asked directly, "Were you disappointed that I never followed you into science? That I went into software instead?" The question revealed an unexpected dimension to his reaction. Concern that knowing my professional stature might retroactively create perceived expectations he hadn't met. This was precisely the opposite of what I wanted. "Not at all," I assured him firmly. "Your father and I always wanted you to find your own path. We were proud of your independence, your determination to build something on your own terms." Relief visibly softened his expression. "And now? How do we move forward from here?" Cynthia's struggling with all this. I think she feels embarrassed about the Golden Sunset situation, maybe even humiliated. "That's understandable," I acknowledged. "Finding out your perceptions have been fundamentally incorrect is disorienting for anyone. I've been thinking about next steps that might help us transition to a healthier dynamic." I shared my preliminary research on the lakefront condominiums, explaining that establishing my own residence again would respect everyone's need for space to adjust to this new reality. "I've also accepted a 3-week consulting project in Norway that begins next month. The timing seems fortuitous, giving everyone some breathing room while establishing my professional identity more visibly within the family. Michael appeared simultaneously relieved and concerned. "You're not feeling pushed out, are you? Because despite everything, you're always welcome here, Mom." "I know that," I assured him. "This isn't about feeling unwelcome, but about creating a more balanced family dynamic, one where I'm seen accurately rather than through the lens of assumed dependency." Our conversation continued as we finished our coffee, discussing practical aspects of transition with the openness that had been missing from our previous interactions about my living situation. By the time Michael headed upstairs for work, we had reached a tentative understanding. I would remain in the basement apartment while exploring housing options and completing the Norwegian project, with a projected move likely within 3 months. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Cynthia left for her sales route without coming downstairs to speak with me, an avoidance that wasn't surprising given her likely embarrassment. Emily stopped briefly before school, her enthusiasm about my secret identity as undimmed as it had been the previous evening. "I told Maddie that my grandmother is a famous geologist who's been living incognito in our basement," she announced with theatrical flair. "She didn't believe me until I showed her your name on the Wikipedia page about that extraction method you patented." Her unfiltered pride was touching, though I gently suggested that incognito might be overstating the situation. "I wasn't hiding my identity, sweetheart. I was simply allowing an incomplete version of it to exist within the family context." "Still cool," she insisted, giving me a quick hug before rushing off to catch her bus. Around midday, I drove to meet Edward Sullivan, the financial advisor who managed my visible domestic accounts. I needed to consolidate some holdings in preparation for purchasing a new residence, and wanted his perspectives on the current real estate market. "Honestly, Eleanor, I've been wondering when you'd transition back to independent living," Edward remarked after we'd concluded our financial discussion. 5 years in your son's basement seemed inconsistent with your typical approach to life." His observation wasn't unkind, merely perceptive. Throughout decades of managing portions of my portfolio, Edward had developed an accurate understanding of my preference for autonomy and strategic decision-making. "The arrangement served important purposes during a difficult transition," I explained. "But yes, it's time for readjustment. The family now has a more complete understanding of my circumstances." "Ah," he nodded knowingly. "That must have been an interesting conversation. Did you show them the full picture, or just enough to establish your financial independence?" The question was relevant. Edward knew about my publicly visible assets, but was also aware that significant portions of my wealth were managed through other channels. He didn't have visibility into those offshore accounts or international investments, nor did he need it for his focused role in my financial strategy. "Enough to correct misconceptions," I replied with a slight smile. The full picture wasn't necessary and might have been overwhelming. After leaving Edward's office, I visited 2 of the lakefront condominiums I had researched that morning. The second property, a 3-bedroom unit with panoramic lake views, a dedicated office space, and exceptional security features, seemed particularly promising. I arranged for a second viewing the following week, accompanied by a trusted real estate attorney. Returning to Michael's house in late afternoon, I was surprised to find Cynthia's car in the driveway. Her sales route typically kept her out until evening, especially midweek. As I entered through the side door that led directly to my basement apartment, I heard voices from the kitchen above. Cynthia's and an unfamiliar male voice engaged in what sounded like an intense discussion. I wasn't deliberately eavesdropping, but the conversation carried clearly through the heating vent near my kitchenette. "I just can't believe she's been living like this when she apparently has millions," Cynthia was saying, her tone a mixture of indignation and bewilderment. "It makes no sense, Dr. Levine. Why would someone choose a basement apartment over the luxury she could clearly afford?" "Grief affects people in complex ways," The male voice, presumably Dr. Levine, responded in measured tones. Combined with aging and the stress of major life transitions, it can sometimes manifest in behaviors that seem inconsistent or irrational to others. The clinical framing immediately alerted me to what was happening. Cynthia wasn't simply discussing her confusion with a friend. She was consulting with a medical professional about my mental state, attempting to pathologize my choices rather than accepting them as legitimate decisions made by a competent adult. "So you think her hiding her wealth while living in our basement could be a sign of cognitive issues?" Cynthia pressed, clearly seeking validation for this interpretation. Dr. Levine's response was appropriately cautious. "I couldn't possibly diagnose anything without a proper examination. Many perfectly rational explanations could account for privacy around financial matters. However, dramatic incongruity between resources and lifestyle choices can sometimes suggest evaluation might be beneficial, especially when combined with other concerning behaviors. Like her claim about this consulting work in Norway," Cynthia added quickly. "It seems so implausible at her age, especially after 5 years of seemingly comfortable retirement." I had heard enough. This attempt to medicalize my autonomy was precisely the reason I had been careful about revealing my true financial status throughout my career. Wealth, particularly when held by women, often attracted efforts to control or appropriate it, sometimes through direct means, sometimes through questioning the holder's capacity to manage it appropriately. Rather than confront Cynthia immediately, I quietly returned to my apartment and called Catherine Williams, the attorney who had managed my estate planning for decades. After explaining the situation, I asked her to meet me the following morning to review and potentially update my legal protections. "This is unfortunately common," Catherine sighed after hearing my account. "Family members confronted with unexpected financial realities sometimes resort to capacity challenges rather than adjusting their perceptions. I'll review everything to ensure your autonomy is fully protected." That evening's family dinner was a study in strained interaction. Michael attempted normal conversation, asking about my day without reference to financial matters. Emily enthusiastically reported on her history teacher's amazed reaction when she mentioned my involvement in pioneering extraction technologies. Cynthia maintained a polite but distant demeanor, offering minimal responses and avoiding direct engagement with me. I participated appropriately in the conversation while observing Cynthia carefully. Her consultation with Dr. Levine suggested she was struggling to integrate yesterday's revelations into her understanding of family dynamics. Rather than accepting the simple truth that I had chosen privacy about my finances for personal reasons, she seemed to be seeking explanations that would preserve her sense of competence and authority within the household. The following morning, I met with Catherine at her downtown law office, where we systematically reviewed and strengthened my legal protections against potential challenges to my autonomy or decision-making capacity. "I've updated your power of attorney documents to include additional protection against challenges," Catherine explained, indicating the revised legal language. "I've also prepared this letter from Dr. Sarah Chen. No relation, I assume?" "No relation," I confirmed with a slight smile, though she's been my physician for nearly 15 years. "Her comprehensive statement regarding your cognitive function and decision-making capacity is unequivocal," Catherine continued. "Combined with the neuropsychological assessment you completed last year as part of your regular health maintenance, these documents create a formidable barrier against any capacity challenges. We also discussed the Norwegian consulting project and my plans to purchase the lakefront condominium. Catherine suggested creating clear documentation of these decisions to establish that they represented continuation of established patterns rather than sudden, potentially concerning changes. "Document everything," she advised as our meeting concluded. "Not because you need to justify your choices, but because clear records help prevent misinterpretation of those choices." Armed with updated legal protections and Catherine's practical advice, I returned to Michael's house feeling more prepared for whatever approaches Cynthia might attempt. What I couldn't have anticipated, however, was that circumstances would force the issue much sooner than expected. As I entered the house, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Michael's car was in the driveway despite it being a workday. Voices came from the living room. Michael's, Cynthia's, and an unfamiliar male voice engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. When I entered the living room, the conversation abruptly ceased. Michael looked deeply uncomfortable, while Cynthia sat with the rigid posture I recognized from tense situations. Between them on the sofa sat a middle-aged man in business casual attire, a leather portfolio open on his lap. "Mom," Michael began, awkwardly. "This is Dr. Levine. He's a geriatric specialist Cynthia knows through her pharmaceutical work." Dr. Levine stood, extending his hand with professional warmth that didn't quite reach his assessing gaze. "Mrs. Chen, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you don't mind this informal consultation. Your family has some concerns they'd like to discuss with you." The calculated ambush was breathtaking in its presumption. They had arranged a medical assessment without my knowledge or consent, clearly hoping to establish a narrative about my capacity that would justify continued control over my decisions. I did not take Dr. Levine's extended hand. Instead, I looked directly at Cynthia. "Did you schedule this informal consultation before or after our discussion about my financial situation?" Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composed expression. "Eleanor, we're just concerned about some of the sudden changes in your behavior and decision-making. Dr. Levine specializes in helping families navigate transitions with aging parents." "I see," I replied evenly. "And which specific behaviors concern you?" "My revelation that I'm financially independent, my acceptance of a consulting project in my field of expertise, or perhaps my decision to purchase a residence appropriate to my actual circumstances rather than continuing to live in your basement?" Dr. Levine interjected with practiced smoothness. "Mrs. Chen, dramatic shifts in financial disclosure or living arrangement preferences can sometimes indicate underlying issues worth exploring, particularly when they appear inconsistent with established patterns." "What you describe as dramatic shifts, doctor, are simply corrections to misperceptions," I countered calmly. "The patterns you consider established were based on incomplete information about my circumstances. Information I chose not to share for personal reasons that were entirely within my rights." Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting his gaze between Cynthia and me. "Mom, no one's suggesting you don't have the right to privacy. We're just trying to understand why you kept so much of your life hidden from us. This more reasonable framing suggested Michael wasn't fully aligned with Cynthia's apparent strategy, which was somewhat reassuring. Before I could respond to him, however, Dr. Levine pressed forward with his assessment agenda. "Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to answer a few standard questions to help establish a baseline? Simple things about orientation to time and place, recent events." "I would not," I interrupted firmly. "I have not consented to any evaluation, formal or informal. Furthermore, I find this attempted intervention inappropriate and potentially actionable from a legal perspective." I removed my phone from my purse and pressed a pre-programmed number. "Catherine? Yes, the situation we discussed has escalated. Would you please explain to Dr. I glanced at him inquiringly. "Levine," he supplied, his professional demeanor faltering slightly. "Dr. Levine, what the legal implications might be for conducting unauthorized assessment attempts." I handed my phone to the increasingly uncomfortable physician. Catherine's precise, authoritative voice was audible even without speakerphone. "Dr. Levine, I'm Catherine Williams, counsel for Eleanor Chen. Before you proceed further, you should be aware that conducting any form of cognitive or capacity assessment without explicit patient consent represents both an ethical violation that could be reported to your licensing board and potentially a legal liability under state elder protection statutes." The effect was immediate and clarifying. Dr. Levine handed the phone back to me with a noticeably less confident expression. "Mrs. Chen, there appears to be some misunderstanding about the nature of my visit. I was simply here as a family consultant, not conducting any formal assessment." A distinction without meaningful difference in this context, I observed. I believe our conversation has concluded, Doctor. After Dr. Levine's hasty departure, an uncomfortable silence descended on the living room. Cynthia remained rigidly seated, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and lingering defiance. Michael looked thoroughly miserable, clearly caught between loyalty to his wife and recognition that a boundary had been inappropriately crossed. What exactly were you hoping to accomplish? I asked Cynthia directly, keeping my tone measured. Despite my justified anger, we were concerned, she replied, though the "we" rang hollow given Michael's evident discomfort with the situation. Your behavior changed so dramatically, suddenly talking about millions of dollars, international consulting, buying lakefront property. It seemed like something might be wrong. What's wrong? I countered. Is the assumption that my autonomy requires validation through someone else's assessment. My behavior hasn't changed, Cynthia. Your knowledge of it has. Michael finally spoke, his voice strained. Mom, I want to be clear that I didn't know Dr. Levine was coming today. I arrived home for lunch and found him here with Cynthia. I wasn't part of arranging this. His distinction was important, suggesting the strategy had been Cynthia's alone rather than a joint decision. This aligned with my observations of their different reactions to my financial revelations. Michael moving toward pride and adjustment, Cynthia toward resistance and control attempts. I appreciate that clarification, I acknowledged. Then, making a decision that had been crystallizing throughout this confrontation, I continued. I think the time has come for me to accelerate my transition to independent living. The condominium I viewed yesterday has another showing tomorrow. I'll be making an offer immediately afterward. Mom, please don't feel you need to rush because of what happened today, Michael protested, clearly distressed by this development. We can work through this as a family. This isn't reactive, Michael, I assured him. It's recognition that the current arrangement has created dynamics that aren't healthy for any of us. My financial independence allows for practical solutions that benefit everyone. Cynthia remained silent, her expression unreadable. Whether she viewed my accelerated departure as victory or defeat wasn't clear, nor was it particularly relevant to my decision-making. The front door opened then, announcing Emily's return from school. She entered the living room and immediately sensed the tension, her perceptive gaze taking in our positions and expressions. What's going on? Did something happen? We're discussing some changes to living arrangements, I explained simply, not wanting to burden her with the full complexity of the adult conflict underway. I've decided to purchase a condominium near the lake within the next few weeks, rather than the more gradual timeline we had discussed. Emily's face fell slightly. You're leaving so soon? I thought we'd have more time before you moved out. Her genuine disappointment was touching. Unlike her parents, Emily had embraced the revelations about my professional and financial status without defensiveness. Seeing them as fascinating dimensions of a grandmother, she was eager to know more fully. The physical distance will be minimal, I assured her, and this change will allow for a more authentic relationship between us, one where you can know me completely rather than partially. Over the next 2 weeks, events moved with the efficiency that substantial financial resources often facilitate. My offer on the lakefront condominium was accepted without counter-proposal. The real estate attorney completed expedited due diligence. Funds were transferred from my investment accounts to close the purchase without financing contingencies. Simultaneously, I prepared for the Norwegian consulting project, reviewing technical specifications and environmental impact parameters for the proposed drilling sites. This professional re-engagement felt invigorating, a return to aspects of my identity that had been unnecessarily muted during the basement apartment years. The family dynamics during this transition period evolved in telling ways. Michael helped with practical aspects of my move, researching furniture delivery options, and even accompanying me to select appropriate technological setups for my new home office. His initial shock at my revelations had evolved into something approaching pride, particularly when colleagues expressed awe at learning of my professional accomplishments. Emily appointed herself my technology consultant, ensuring my new home would have optimal streaming capabilities and smart home features, appropriate for someone actively engaged in international consulting. Her enthusiasm for integrating me into contemporary technological ecosystems was both touching and practically useful. Cynthia maintained a polite but distant approach, her initial attempts at medical intervention apparently abandoned after the Dr. Levine debacle. Whether she had accepted the reality of my competence and autonomy remained unclear, but she had at least ceased active resistance to it. The day before my departure for Norway, we held a family dinner in my newly furnished condominium, a spacious, elegant space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The contrast with the basement apartment could hardly have been more pronounced, yet the essential relationship dynamics remained recognizable. Michael supportive if somewhat reserved, Emily enthusiastically engaged, Cynthia politely participating, without full emotional investment. As we enjoyed dessert on the balcony overlooking the lake, Emily asked the question that perhaps best captured the journey we had traveled together. "Grandma, do you regret not telling us about your work and money sooner? Would things have been different if we had known from the beginning?" The question deserved thoughtful consideration. "Different, certainly," I acknowledged after a moment. "Whether better or worse isn't quite so simple to determine. There were benefits to the arrangement we had, genuine family connections uncomplicated by awareness of financial disparities. But there were also costs in terms of authentic understanding. I wish I had known what you really did all those years," Michael added quietly. "Not about the money necessarily, but about your achievements. I would have been so proud to tell people about my mother, the pioneering geologist, instead of just saying you worked in energy." His comment touched something fundamental, the universal desire to be seen and known authentically by those we love. My career-long habit of privacy, while serving important purposes during my professional years, had perhaps outlived its usefulness in the context of family relationships. "Perhaps the lesson," I suggested, "is that different phases of life require different approaches to privacy and disclosure. What served me well professionally didn't necessarily serve our family relationships optimally." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "So it's not about right or wrong choices, but about adapting as circumstances change?" "Precisely," I agreed, impressed as always by her insightful perspective. "And now we have the opportunity to build relationships based on more complete understanding, which I hope will prove enriching for all of us." Even Cynthia contributed to this reflective conversation, acknowledging reluctantly, "I should have recognized there was more to your story, Eleanor." The clues were there: your vocabulary, your analytical approach to problems, even small comments about international affairs that suggested broader knowledge than I attributed to you. Her recognition, however belated, suggested potential for more balanced interaction moving forward. Whether this would evolve into genuine mutual respect remained to be seen, but the acknowledgement itself represented meaningful progress. The evening concluded with arrangements for my return from Norway and plans for Emily to visit the project site during her spring break, an educational opportunity that aligned perfectly with her developing interest in environmental science. As I prepared for bed in my new home that night, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from basement dweller to reclaimed professional identity. The transition hadn't been without conflict or pain, but it had ultimately created space for more authentic family relationships based on who I actually was rather than who they had assumed me to be. Simultaneously, I prepared for the Norwegian consulting project, reviewing technical specifications and environmental impact parameters for the proposed drilling sites. This professional re-engagement felt invigorating, a return to aspects of my identity that had been unnecessarily muted during the basement apartment years. The family dynamics during this transition period evolved in telling ways. Michael helped with practical aspects of my move, researching furniture delivery options, and even accompanying me to select appropriate technological setups for my new home office. His initial shock at my revelations had evolved into something approaching pride, particularly when colleagues expressed awe at learning of my professional accomplishments. Emily appointed herself my technology consultant, ensuring my new home would have optimal streaming capabilities and smart home features, appropriate for someone actively engaged in international consulting. Her enthusiasm for integrating me into contemporary technological ecosystems was both touching and practically useful. Cynthia maintained a polite but distant approach, her initial attempts at medical intervention apparently abandoned after the Dr. Levine debacle. Whether she had accepted the reality of my competence and autonomy remained unclear, but she had at least ceased active resistance to it. The day before my departure for Norway, we held a family dinner in my newly furnished condominium, a spacious, elegant space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The contrast with the basement apartment could hardly have been more pronounced, yet the essential relationship dynamics remained recognizable. Michael supportive if somewhat reserved, Emily enthusiastically engaged, Cynthia politely participating, without full emotional investment. As we enjoyed dessert on the balcony overlooking the lake, Emily asked the question that perhaps best captured the journey we had traveled together. "Grandma, do you regret not telling us about your work and money sooner? Would things have been different if we had known from the beginning?" The question deserved thoughtful consideration. "Different, certainly," I acknowledged after a moment. "Whether better or worse isn't quite so simple to determine. There were benefits to the arrangement we had, genuine family connections uncomplicated by awareness of financial disparities. But there were also costs in terms of authentic understanding. I wish I had known what you really did all those years," Michael added quietly. "Not about the money necessarily, but about your achievements. I would have been so proud to tell people about my mother, the pioneering geologist, instead of just saying you worked in energy." His comment touched something fundamental, the universal desire to be seen and known authentically by those we love. My career-long habit of privacy, while serving important purposes during my professional years, had perhaps outlived its usefulness in the context of family relationships. Perhaps the lesson, I suggested, is that different phases of life require different approaches to privacy and disclosure. What served me well professionally didn't necessarily serve our family relationships optimally. Emily nodded thoughtfully. "So it's not about right or wrong choices, but about adapting as circumstances change?" "Precisely," I agreed, impressed as always by her insightful perspective. "And now we have the opportunity to build relationships based on more complete understanding, which I hope will prove enriching for all of us." Even Cynthia contributed to this reflective conversation, acknowledging reluctantly, "I should have recognized there was more to your story, Eleanor." The clues were there: your vocabulary, your analytical approach to problems, even small comments about international affairs that suggested broader knowledge than I attributed to you. Her recognition, however belated, suggested potential for more balanced interaction moving forward. Whether this would evolve into genuine mutual respect remained to be seen, but the acknowledgement itself represented meaningful progress. The evening concluded with arrangements for my return from Norway and plans for Emily to visit the project site during her spring break, an educational opportunity that aligned perfectly with her developing interest in environmental science. As I prepared for bed in my new home that night, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from basement dweller to reclaimed professional identity. The transition hadn't been without conflict or pain, but it had ultimately created space for more authentic family relationships based on who I actually was rather than who they had assumed me to be. My phone chimed with a text message from Barbara Chen. "Team excited about your arrival in Bergen. The client specifically mentioned how valuable your historical perspective on North Sea formations will be to the environmental impact assessments." This professional acknowledgement, coming at the conclusion of my family transition, seemed appropriately symbolic, After years of allowing myself to be primarily defined by family roles, mother, mother-in-law, grandmother, I had reclaimed the fuller dimensions of my identity without sacrificing those meaningful connections. The basement apartment had served its purpose during a difficult transition period after William's death. Now, this elegant lakefront condominium would serve a different purpose, housing not just Eleanor Chen, the mother and grandmother, but also Dr. Eleanor Chen, the respected petroleum geologist, the financial independent, the continuing professional, contributor. Most importantly, it would house the integrated person I actually was, neither defined exclusively by family roles nor by professional accomplishments, but by the complete constellation of experiences, capabilities, and relationships that constituted my authentic self. The secret fortune that had remained concealed during those basement years had never been primarily about money. The truly valuable hidden asset had been my complete identity, my professional accomplishments, my intellectual capabilities, my decision-making autonomy. Reclaiming these aspects of myself, bringing them into the light of family awareness, represented the most significant wealth recovery of all. Tomorrow, I would board a plane to Norway, engaging once again with the professional community that had always valued my expertise without qualification or condescension. In 3 weeks, I would return to a new home that appropriately reflected my actual circumstances and lifestyle preferences. And throughout, I would maintain meaningful connections with family members who now had the opportunity to know me more completely than ever before. The basement dweller was gone. In her place stood the woman I had always been, complex, capable, and finally fully visible to those who mattered most. 6 months after my revelations to the family, I stood on the observation deck of an oil platform in the North Sea, surveying the culmination of the Norwegian project that had marked my professional re-emergence. The implementation of my environmental impact recommendations had reduced the ecological footprint of the operation by nearly 40%, while maintaining economic viability, a balance I had championed throughout my career. "Dr. Chen, the transport minister has arrived for the inspection," my assistant called, gesturing toward the helicopter landing pad where Norwegian officials were disembarking. The respect evident in how the project team addressed me. Always. Dr. Chen, never Eleanor or Mrs. Chen, provided a striking contrast to how I had been perceived in my son's basement. Here, my expertise was the defining characteristic, my age merely an indicator of experience rather than limitation. Later that evening, as I prepared for my flight back to Chicago, I received a video call from Emily. Her excited face filled my screen before she panned the camera around to reveal her surroundings, my lakefront condominium where she was apparently hosting a small gathering. "Grandma, I got my MIT acceptance letter today," she announced, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "I wanted you to be part of the celebration." The camera moved to show Michael and several of Emily's friends gathered around my dining table, which was decorated with MIT colors. Even Cynthia was there, arranging refreshments with what appeared to be genuine engagement in the celebration. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I responded, genuinely delighted by her achievement. "MIT's environmental science program is perfect for your interests. I included the article you published on sustainable drilling practices in my application portfolio," Emily explained proudly. My interviewer said it was refreshingly unconventional for a high school student to engage with the complexity of balancing environmental concerns with energy needs. Michael moved into frame, his expression warm. "We're so proud of her, Mom, and grateful for the educational trust you established. MIT would have been a financial strain without it." This acknowledgement represented significant growth from the man who, just 6 months earlier, had been planning to move me to assisted living based on assumptions about my financial limitations. Now he spoke openly about the educational trust, comfortable with the reality of my financial contributions to the family. The most surprising development of the evening came when Cynthia asked to speak with me privately. Emily handed her the phone, and she moved to the quieter space of my home office. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "The Dr. Levine situation was inexcusable. I was so disoriented by the revelations about your financial status and professional background that I grasped for explanations that would preserve my understanding of our family dynamic." Her direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing was unexpected. Throughout the months since my move, our interactions had remained politely distant, neither of us directly addressing the attempted medical intervention that had accelerated my departure from their home. "I appreciate your apology, Cynthia," I responded, choosing my words carefully. "That period was challenging for everyone as we adjusted to new understandings." "I've been seeing a therapist," she continued with surprising candor. "She's helped me recognize how much of my identity was wrapped up in being the competent manager of family affairs, the one who arranged everything from vacation planning to your care arrangements." This insight suggested a level of self-reflection I hadn't anticipated from her. "That's a valuable perspective," I acknowledged. "The therapist suggested something I'd like to propose," Cynthia said, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Would you consider meeting for lunch occasionally, just the two of us, to develop a relationship that isn't defined by the past misperceptions? I realize now I never really knew you at all." The suggestion represented potential for genuine connection beyond the roles that had previously defined our interaction. "I think that would be valuable," I agreed. "Perhaps after I return from Norway next week." When I returned to Chicago, I found my condominium filled with subtle evidence of Emily's presence during my absence. University catalogs on the coffee table, a new plant on the balcony with careful watering instructions attached, and a handmade card thanking me for being the coolest grandma who ever pretended to be ordinary. My first lunch with Cynthia proved surprisingly productive. Without the backdrop of the basement apartment and its implicit power dynamic, we discovered shared interests in international travel and contemporary fiction that had never surfaced during our previous years of cohabitation. While we would likely never develop the warm closeness that naturally characterized my relationship with Emily, we established a foundation for respectful interaction based on more accurate mutual perception. Michael, meanwhile, had embraced my professional reemergence with unexpected enthusiasm. He regularly shared articles about geological developments that might interest me, and had even attended an energy industry conference when it came to Chicago, proudly introducing himself to my colleagues as Dr. Chen's son. Witnessing his genuine pride in my accomplishments healed something that my years of professional privacy had unintentionally damaged: his complete understanding of his mother's identity beyond family roles. The most significant development, however, came unexpectedly during a family dinner at my condominium 3 months after my return from Norway. As we finished dessert, Michael cleared his throat with uncharacteristic formality. "Mom, I've been thinking about something important," he began, exchanging a glance with Cynthia that suggested prior discussion. "Your experience has made me recognize how easily family histories and accomplishments can be lost between generations. I realize now that I never fully shared my understanding of who you are with Emily, partly because I didn't know myself." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small digital recorder. "I'd like to interview you about your life and career. Properly document your journey as one of the first women in petroleum geology, your patents, your consulting work. Create a proper oral history that preserves your story for Emily and future generations." The suggestion touched me deeply. Throughout my professional life, I had prioritized accomplishment over recognition, substance over acknowledgement. The idea that my son now wanted to formally document my contributions represented the most meaningful form of appreciation. "I'd be honored," I said simply. Over the following months, Michael and I engaged in a series of recorded conversations that traced my journey from a geology undergraduate facing institutional skepticism about women in the field through the complex, Political and Scientific Challenges of International Energy Consulting. Emily often joined these sessions, her insightful questions adding intergenerational perspective to the emerging narrative. 1 year after moving out of the basement apartment, I hosted a gathering at my condominium that symbolized the full transformation of our family dynamics. Michael and Cynthia were there, their interaction with me now characterized by mutual respect rather than protective concern. Emily, home from her first semester at MIT, eagerly described her research project on environmental impact assessment methodologies, work directly influenced by my career example. Most significantly, we were joined by my colleagues from the Norwegian project and several former associates from Chen Geological Consulting, professional connections that had previously existed entirely separate from my family life. Watching Michael engage these colleagues in conversation about my contributions to the field, seeing Emily absorb professional wisdom from women who had followed paths I had helped pioneer, even observing Cynthia's genuine interest in this previously invisible dimension of my identity, all confirmed that the painful revelations of the previous year had ultimately created space for more authentic connection. As I stood on my balcony later that evening, watching moonlight trace a silver path across Lake Michigan, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from basement dweller to fully realized self. The secret fortune that had catalyzed this transformation had never been primarily about money. The true wealth had been my complete identity, professional, intellectual, and personal, finally integrated and acknowledged within my most important relationships. The basement years had served their purpose during a difficult transition after William's death. Now, this new chapter offered something more valuable than financial security or professional recognition: the opportunity to be fully known and authentically valued by the family that mattered most to me. Looking back at my guests through the balcony doors, family and colleagues mingling in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, I smiled at the completion of a circle long in forming. The woman who had once been relegated to the basement had not only reclaimed her rightful place, but expanded the possibilities for connection across the generations of her family. That, I reflected as I rejoined my guests, was the most valuable fortune of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.